The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province as Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her tactical gear one final time. The weight of her rifle felt familiar against her shoulder, a constant companion through 18 months of deployment. At 28, she had already earned the respect of her fellow soldiers through countless missions, but today felt different. The intelligence report spoke of increased insurgent activity in the valley below, and her unit was tasked with securing a strategic outpost that had gone silent 3 days earlier. Sarah's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, gathered the squad around a makeshift table where a detailed map lay spread out under the harsh Afghan sun. Rodriguez was a decorated veteran with silver threading through his dark hair, a man who had earned his rank through decades of service and countless dangerous missions. His weathered face bore the marks of a soldier who had seen too much combat, yet his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had kept his men alive through numerous operations. The mission briefing was straightforward on paper, but complex in reality. Their objective was to reach the abandoned outpost, assess the situation, and either re-establish communications or evacuate any survivors. The route would take them through a narrow valley known locally as the Devil's Corridor, a stretch of rocky terrain that had claimed too many lives over the years. Insurgents often used the high ground to their advantage, turning the valley into a deadly funnel for coalition forces. Sarah listened intently as Rodriguez outlined their approach strategy. They would move in 2 teams, with Rodriguez leading the primary assault team while Sarah commanded the support unit that would provide overwatch from elevated positions. Her team consisted of 4 experienced soldiers: Sergeant Mike Thompson, a sniper with an uncanny ability to place shots at impossible distances; Corporal Lisa Martinez, a communications specialist who could maintain contact with base even in the most challenging conditions; Private First Class David Kim, a medic whose steady hands had saved countless lives; and Private Jake Morrison, a young soldier on his first deployment but already proving himself capable under pressure. As they prepared to move out, Sarah noticed the tension in her team's faces. These were seasoned professionals, but the Devil's Corridor had a reputation that preceded it. Stories circulated among the troops about squads that had entered the valley and never returned, about the echoing sounds of gunfire that would suddenly fall silent, leaving only questions and grief in their wake. Yet despite the danger, there was also a sense of duty that drove them forward. Somewhere in that outpost, fellow soldiers might be waiting for rescue. The convoy of armored vehicles moved slowly through the dusty roads leading to their insertion point. Sarah used the time to review her equipment one more time, checking her radio, ammunition, and medical supplies. She had learned early in her military career that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Her fellow soldiers did the same, each lost in their own pre-mission rituals that helped calm nerves and focus minds. Rodriguez had always been more than just a commanding officer to his troops. He was the kind of leader who remembered birthdays, who asked about families back home, and who never asked his soldiers to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Sarah had served under him for 8 months, and in that time, she had watched him make the kinds of decisions that kept soldiers alive. He had a way of reading situations that seemed almost supernatural, an ability to sense danger before it materialized. The insertion point was located at the mouth of the Devil's Corridor, where the road ended and the rocky terrain began. As the vehicles came to a stop, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every mission. This was the moment when training took over, when months of preparation would be put to the ultimate test. She gathered her team around her for a final equipment check, ensuring that radios were functioning and that everyone understood their roles. The plan called for Rodriguez's team to advance through the valley floor while Sarah's unit would climb to higher ground and establish overwatch positions. From there, they could provide covering fire and early warning if insurgents attempted to ambush the primary team. It was a sound strategy that had worked in similar operations, but the Devil's Corridor presented unique challenges that made every mission unpredictable. As they began their ascent up the rocky slopes, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The valley was too quiet, lacking the normal sounds of wildlife and human activity that usually indicated a peaceful area. Her instincts, honed through months of combat experience, were telling her that something was wrong. She had learned to trust these feelings as they had saved her life more than once. The climb was treacherous with loose rocks and steep inclines that made progress slow and difficult. Each step had to be carefully placed to avoid creating noise that might alert potential enemies to their presence. Sarah's team moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had worked together long enough to anticipate each other's movements. They communicated through hand signals, saving radio communications for essential information only. Halfway up the slope, Sergeant Thompson raised his hand in a signal that brought the entire team to an immediate halt. Through his rifle scope, he had spotted movement in the rocks above them. For several tense minutes they remained motionless, waiting to see if they had been detected. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the rocky formations. Rodriguez's voice crackled through Sarah's radio earpiece, reporting that his team had reached their first checkpoint without incident. The outpost was still several kilometers ahead, but so far the mission was proceeding according to plan. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while keeping her eyes fixed on the terrain above them, where Thompson had spotted the movement. The morning was growing warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and Sarah could feel sweat beginning to form under her tactical vest. The weight of her equipment seemed to increase with each step, but she pushed these discomforts aside. Physical hardship was part of the job, and she had long ago learned to ignore the body's complaints when duty called. As they finally reached their planned overwatch position, Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction. From this vantage point, they had an excellent view of the valley floor and could see Rodriguez's team moving carefully through the rocky terrain below. The abandoned outpost was visible in the distance, a cluster of concrete buildings that looked deceptively peaceful in the morning light. The silence in the valley was suddenly shattered by the distinctive crack of sniper fire echoing off the rocky walls. Sarah's heart lurched as she watched Rodriguez's team immediately take cover behind whatever protection they could find. Through her binoculars, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions high on the opposite ridge, indicating that the insurgents had prepared an elaborate ambush. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with controlled urgency, reporting contact with enemy forces and requesting immediate support. Sarah quickly assessed the situation, identifying at least 6 different firing positions that were pinning down the primary team. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site well, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous for anyone caught in the valley floor. Sergeant Thompson was already adjusting his rifle, seeking targets among the distant rocks. His expertise as a marksman would be crucial in the coming firefight, as the insurgents held the advantage of superior positioning. Sarah coordinated with her team, assigning sectors of fire and ensuring that they could provide effective support without exposing themselves unnecessarily to return fire. The battle that followed was intense and chaotic. The sound of automatic weapons fire filled the air as both sides exchanged deadly volleys. Sarah watched through her scope as Rodriguez moved his team from cover to cover, trying to find a position where they could effectively return fire. The lieutenant colonel was leading from the front, as always, exposing himself to danger to better direct his soldiers. Corporal Martinez worked frantically with her radio equipment, calling for air support and artillery assistance. However, the mountainous terrain and the proximity of friendly forces to enemy positions made immediate support problematic. They were essentially on their own until the situation could be clarified and support assets could be safely deployed. Private Kim had his medical supplies ready, knowing that casualties were likely in such an intense firefight. His young face was tense with concentration, but his hands remained steady as he prepared for whatever might come. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her team's professionalism under pressure, even as the situation continued to deteriorate. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see that Rodriguez's team was taking effective fire from at least 3 different directions. The insurgents had clearly planned this ambush carefully, using the terrain to their maximum advantage. What had appeared to be an abandoned valley was actually a carefully prepared killing ground, and Rodriguez's team had walked directly into it. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only minutes. In-combat time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, with seconds of intense action feeling like eternities, while entire minutes could pass in what seemed like heartbeats. Sarah focused on identifying targets and coordinating her team's fire, trying to suppress the enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to Rodriguez's unit. Thompson's rifle spoke repeatedly, each shot carefully aimed at enemy positions. His marksmanship was exceptional, and Sarah could see insurgents abandoning positions after his precise fire found its mark. However, for every position they suppressed, another seemed to open up, suggesting that they were facing a larger force than intelligence had indicated. The turning point came when Sarah noticed movement in a cluster of rocks directly above Rodriguez's position. Through her scope, she could see insurgents maneuvering with what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades. If they succeeded in getting into position, they could devastate the exposed team below. Sarah immediately shifted her team's fire to engage this new threat, but the range was extreme and the targets were well concealed. Rodriguez's situation was becoming increasingly desperate. His team was pinned down in a depression that provided minimal cover, and enemy fire was growing more accurate as the insurgents adjusted their aim. Sarah could hear the stress in his voice over the radio as he attempted to coordinate his team's response while under constant fire. The rocky terrain that provided the insurgents with excellent cover also worked against Sarah's team, limiting their ability to engage effectively. Many of their shots were blocked by intervening rocks and ridges, making it difficult to provide the level of support that Rodriguez needed. Sarah realized that more aggressive action would be required if they were going to break the ambush. Martinez finally succeeded in establishing contact with air support, but the estimated time of arrival was still 20 minutes away. In a firefight of this intensity, 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Rodriguez's team needed help immediately, not in 20 minutes. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Leaving Thompson in his overwatch position to continue providing sniper support, Sarah began moving down the slope with Martinez, Kim, and Morrison. Her plan was to flank the insurgent positions and attack them from an unexpected direction, hopefully breaking their coordinated assault and giving Rodriguez's team an opportunity to extract from their exposed position. The descent was treacherous under the best of circumstances, but moving quickly while under fire made it exponentially more dangerous. Loose rocks threatened to start avalanches that would reveal their position, while the constant sound of gunfire made communication difficult. Sarah led by example, moving with a combination of speed and caution that kept her team together while making progress toward their objective. As they moved, Sarah could see that Rodriguez's situation was becoming more critical by the minute. Enemy fire was intensifying, and she could see dust and rock fragments flying from impacts near his position. The insurgents were clearly attempting to overwhelm the pinned-down team through sheer volume of fire, and it was only a matter of time before they succeeded. The flanking maneuver required Sarah's team to cross several open areas where they would be exposed to enemy observation and fire. Each crossing was a calculated risk, with team members providing covering fire while others moved. The insurgents were focused primarily on Rodriguez's team, but Sarah knew that discovery was only a matter of time. Halfway through their movement, Morrison stumbled and dislodged a shower of rocks that clattered down the slope. The sound was audible even over the gunfire, and Sarah saw several insurgent fighters turn in their direction. Muzzle flashes erupted from their new position as the enemy realized they were being flanked. Now Sarah's team was also under fire, caught between their original position and their objective. The situation had gone from dangerous to potentially catastrophic in a matter of seconds. Sarah had to make another split-second decision that would determine whether her bold plan would save Rodriguez's team or result in the loss of both units. The weight of command had never felt heavier, as Sarah realized that the lives of 8 soldiers now depended on her next decisions. The ambush had turned into a complex three-dimensional battle, with multiple groups of fighters engaging across difficult terrain. Success would require not just courage and skill, but also the kind of tactical thinking that separated competent soldiers from exceptional ones. Sarah's mind raced as bullets whistled past her position, striking the rocks around her team with sharp cracks that sent stone fragments flying. The insurgents had clearly prepared for the possibility of flanking attacks, positioning fighters to cover multiple approaches to their main ambush site. What had seemed like a straightforward rescue operation had evolved into a complex battle that was testing every aspect of her training and experience. Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece, strained but still controlled. His team had managed to find slightly better cover, but they were still pinned down and taking heavy fire. Through the radio static, she could hear the distinctive sound of incoming rounds, and the occasional grunt of effort as his soldiers moved between positions. Time was running out, and conventional tactics were proving insufficient against the well-prepared enemy force. Sarah made a decision that went against standard operating procedures, but felt right in her gut. Instead of continuing the flanking maneuver that had been compromised, she decided to create a diversion that would draw enemy fire away from Rodriguez's position. The plan was risky and would put her team in extreme danger, but it might provide the distraction needed for the lieutenant colonel's unit to escape their trap. She quickly explained her plan to Martinez. Kim and Morrison threw hand signals and whispered words during brief lulls in the gunfire. Her team's faces showed a mixture of concern and determination, but none of them questioned her decision. They had trained together, fought together, and trusted each other's judgment in ways that only combat soldiers could understand. The diversion began with Martinez using her radio equipment to broadcast false coordinates, suggesting that additional friendly forces were approaching from multiple directions.
Meanwhile, Sarah positioned her team to
create the illusion of a larger unit by firing from different positions and using techniques designed to make their small group sound like a much larger force. Kim proved invaluable in this deception, using his knowledge of insurgent tactics to predict how they would respond to the perceived threat. His medical training had given him a unique perspective on battlefield psychology, understanding how stress and confusion could cloud judgment and lead to tactical mistakes. Morrison, despite his relative inexperience, followed Sarah's lead with the kind of unwavering trust that marked a good soldier. The ruse initially worked better than Sarah had hoped. Several insurgent groups shifted their fire toward her team's position, reducing the pressure on Rodriguez's unit. However, this success came at a cost, as Sarah's small team was now bearing the brunt of enemy attention. Rounds were impacting all around their position, and it was only a matter of time before their luck ran out. Rodriguez seized the opportunity created by Sarah's diversion to begin moving his team toward better defensive positions. His tactical expertise showed as he coordinated their movement, using suppressive fire and bounds to gradually extract his soldiers from the killing zone. Sarah watched through her scope as the lieutenant colonel personally ensured that each of his men reached safety before moving himself. The battle had now been raging for over an hour, and ammunition was becoming a concern for both teams. Sarah's team had brought standard combat loads, but the intensity of the firefight was depleting their supplies faster than anticipated. She could see similar concerns reflected in the movements of Rodriguez's team as they became more selective with their shots. Thompson's voice crackled through the radio from his overwatch position, reporting that he could see additional insurgent reinforcements moving into the area. The enemy force was larger than anyone had anticipated, and they appeared to have planned this ambush as part of a larger operation. What had begun as a routine security mission was evolving into a significant engagement that would require all of their skills to survive. Sarah realized that her diversion had served its immediate purpose, but was no longer sustainable. Her team was taking increasingly accurate fire, and their position was becoming untenable. She needed a new plan that would not only ensure her team's survival, but also create an opportunity for both units to extract safely from the engagement area. The solution came to her as she observed the insurgent firing patterns and movement. The enemy fighters were operating from prepared positions that provided excellent protection, but also limited their mobility. If she could force them to abandon these positions, it might create the chaos needed for both friendly teams to withdraw under cover. Sarah's new plan required her to move closer to the enemy positions, close enough to use grenades effectively against their fortified locations. It was an extremely dangerous proposition that would put her within easy rifle range of multiple enemy fighters, but it offered the best chance of breaking the stalemate that was developing. She explained her intentions to her team, emphasizing that this would be a solo mission to minimize casualties. Martinez immediately objected, arguing that the plan was too risky and that they should wait for air support. However, Sarah could see through her binoculars that Rodriguez's team was again coming under heavy fire, indicating that the enemy was reorganizing their assault. Kim supported Sarah's assessment, pointing out that several members of Rodriguez's team appeared to be wounded based on their movements and positioning. As the team medic, he understood that time was a critical factor in treating combat injuries. Morrison remained silent but nodded his agreement, showing the kind of trust in leadership that was essential in combat situations. Thompson's voice provided additional urgency to the situation, reporting that the insurgent reinforcements were now in position and preparing to assault Rodriguez's location directly. The enemy appeared to be massing for a coordinated attack that would overwhelm the defensive positions that the lieutenant colonel's team had managed to establish. Sarah checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that her grenades were properly positioned for quick access and that her rifle was loaded with a fresh magazine. The weight of her gear felt familiar and reassuring, each piece of equipment representing countless hours of training and preparation. She had trained for situations like this, but training could never fully replicate the stress and chaos of actual combat. As she prepared to move out, Sarah took a moment to look at each member of her team. These were good soldiers who had followed her into an increasingly dangerous situation without hesitation. Their faces showed the strain of prolonged combat, but also the kind of determination that made them effective fighters. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she was proud to serve alongside them. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice, reporting that his team was preparing for an enemy assault and requesting immediate assistance. Sarah could hear the tension in his transmission, the controlled urgency of a leader who knew his options were running out. In the background, she could hear the increasing volume of enemy fire as the insurgents prepared for their final push. Sarah began her advance toward the enemy positions with the calculated movements of a predator stalking its prey. Every step was carefully placed to minimize noise and avoid silhouetting herself against the sky. The rocky terrain provided some concealment, but she was acutely aware that she was moving into increasingly dangerous territory with each forward bound. The insurgent fighters were concentrated in a series of connected positions that formed a rough semicircle around Rodriguez's trapped team. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different locations, indicating a well-coordinated defensive network that had been prepared in advance. The enemy had clearly studied this terrain and understood how to use it to maximum advantage. As she moved closer, Sarah could hear the insurgents communicating in rapid exchanges of local dialect. While she couldn't understand the specific words, the tone and urgency suggested they were coordinating their planned assault on Rodriguez's position. The sound of their voices gave her valuable intelligence about their numbers and approximate locations. The first grenade position Sarah selected was a cluster of rocks where she had observed particularly heavy fire emanating from throughout the engagement. The enemy fighters there had been especially effective at suppressing Rodriguez's team, and neutralizing that position would significantly reduce the pressure on the lieutenant colonel's unit. Sarah worked her way to within 30 meters of the target position, close enough to ensure accurate grenade placement, but still far enough away to avoid being caught in the blast radius. The approach required her to crawl across rough ground that tore at her uniform and equipment, but she maintained noise discipline despite the discomfort. Just as she was preparing to throw her first grenade, an insurgent fighter emerged from cover to reload his weapon. For a moment, the two adversaries stared at each other across the rocky terrain, both surprised by the unexpected encounter. Sarah's training took over as she brought her rifle to bear, but the insurgent was already diving back toward cover while shouting warnings to his comrades. The element of surprise was gone, but Sarah was committed to her course of action. She threw her grenade toward the position where the fighter had disappeared, following it immediately with a second grenade to prevent the insurgents from simply moving to adjacent cover. The explosion sent rock fragments and debris flying in all directions, temporarily silencing the weapons from that position. The insurgent response was immediate and intense. Sarah found herself the target of concentrated fire from multiple directions as enemy fighters tried to locate and eliminate this new threat. Bullets struck the rocks around her position with metallic whines and sharp cracks, creating a deadly symphony that tested her nerves and resolve. Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece, asking for her status and expressing concern about the increased enemy fire in her direction. Sarah could hear relief in his transmission as well, as the elimination of the key firing position had reduced the pressure on his team significantly. However, she was now in extreme danger and needed to continue moving to avoid being pinned down herself. Sarah's next target was a position that had been directing fire toward Thompson's Overwatch location. The sniper had been providing crucial support throughout the engagement, but increasing enemy attention was limiting his effectiveness. If she could neutralize the threat to Thompson's position, he would be able to resume providing accurate long-range fire support. The movement to her next position required Sarah to cross an open area where she would be exposed to enemy observation and fire. She used smoke grenades to create concealment, but the wind in the valley was unpredictable and threatened to disperse the smoke before she could complete her movement. As she dashed across the exposed ground, Sarah could hear bullets passing close enough to her body that she felt the displacement of air. One round struck her backpack with enough force to stagger her, but the equipment absorbed the impact without serious damage. She reached cover with her heart pounding and adrenaline surging through her system. From her new position, Sarah could see that her actions were having the desired effect on the overall battle. Rodriguez's team was beginning to move more freely, taking advantage of the reduced enemy fire to improve their defensive positions. Thompson had resumed his precise shooting, and she could see insurgents abandoning positions after his accurate fire found its mark. However, Sarah's aggressive actions had also focused enemy attention on her location. She could see insurgent fighters maneuvering to surround her position, understanding that she represented a significant threat to their planned assault. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and she needed to adapt her tactics accordingly. Martinez's voice came through the radio, reporting that air support was finally approaching the area. The distinctive sound of rotary wing aircraft was beginning to echo off the valley walls, providing hope that the tactical situation was about to improve dramatically. However, the aircraft would need several minutes. To assess the situation and engage appropriate targets, Sarah realized that she needed to maintain pressure on the enemy positions to prevent them from overrunning Rodriguez's team before air support could arrive. Despite the increasing danger to her own position, she continued her aggressive assault on the insurgent network, using her remaining grenades to disrupt their coordination and communications. The third position she targeted was a machine gun nest that had been particularly effective at preventing Rodriguez's team from improving their defensive positions. The crew-served weapon represented a significant threat that required immediate attention. Sarah worked her way to within throwing range, but the approach required her to expose herself to fire from multiple directions. As she prepared to engage the machine gun position, Sarah noticed movement that indicated insurgent fighters were attempting to flank her location. The enemy had recognized her as a priority target and was committing significant resources to eliminating her threat. She was running out of time and options. The sound of approaching helicopters was growing louder, but Sarah could see that the insurgents were preparing for a final coordinated assault on Rodriguez's position. If they succeeded in overrunning the lieutenant colonel's team before air support could intervene, her sacrifices would have been meaningless. Sarah made a decision that would define not only the outcome of this battle, but also her entire military career. Instead of continuing her systematic assault on individual positions, she decided to create a direct confrontation that would force the insurgents to choose between continuing their assault on Rodriguez or defending against her immediate threat. Loading her last grenade into the launcher attached to her rifle, Sarah stood up from cover and began advancing directly toward the insurgent command position. The movement was contrary to everything she had been taught about small unit tactics, but it created exactly the kind of dramatic threat that would force the enemy to respond. The insurgent reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fighters throughout the network turned their weapons toward Sarah's advancing figure, creating a storm of gunfire that seemed impossible to survive. However, her bold action also provided Rodriguez's team with the opportunity they needed to launch their own counter-assault. The moment Sarah stood up and began her direct assault, time seemed to slow down in the way that only happens during the most intense combat situations. She could see muzzle flashes erupting from positions all around her, as insurgent fighters turned their weapons toward this unexpected threat. The air filled with the distinctive crack of bullets passing close to her body, creating a deadly orchestra that accompanied her advance. Rodriguez immediately understood what Sarah was attempting to accomplish. Her bold action had created a window of opportunity that might not come again, and the experienced officer began coordinating his team's response. His voice came through the radio with crisp commands as he directed his soldiers to take advantage of the distraction Sarah had created. Thompson, from his overwatch position, had a perfect view of the unfolding drama. His sniper rifle spoke repeatedly as he engaged targets that posed the greatest threat to Sarah's advance. Each shot was carefully aimed and precisely placed, providing crucial support that helped keep Sarah moving forward despite the overwhelming enemy fire directed at her position. Sarah's advance toward the insurgent command position required her to cross approximately 50 meters of broken ground while under fire from multiple directions. She moved in short bounds, using available cover when possible, but never allowing herself to become pinned down in any single location. Her training had taught her that momentum was crucial in assault operations, and stopping would mean certain death. The insurgent fighters were clearly surprised by the audacity of her attack. Their tactical doctrine had not prepared them for a single soldier conducting a frontal assault against prepared positions while under fire. This confusion worked in Sarah's favor, as some fighters hesitated or missed opportunities to engage her effectively during the critical moments of her advance. Martinez, Kim, and Morrison had repositioned themselves to provide supporting fire for Sarah's assault. Despite the extreme danger, they understood that their team leader needed their support to have any chance of success. Their disciplined fire helped suppress several enemy positions and forced insurgent fighters to divide their attention between multiple threats. As Sarah closed the distance to her target, she could see the insurgent command position more clearly. It was situated in a natural depression surrounded by large rocks that provided excellent protection from most directions. However, the position had been designed to observe and control the valley floor, not to defend against a close assault from an unexpected direction. The insurgent commander appeared to be a middle-aged man with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in combat. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see him directing his fighters with hand signals while speaking rapidly into a radio handset. His tactical competence was evident in the coordinated nature of the ambush, but he was clearly struggling to adapt to the changing situation. Sarah's final grenade was reserved for the command position, and she needed to get close enough to ensure accurate placement while avoiding the blast radius that would affect her own position. The approach required her to navigate through a maze of rocks and obstacles while continuing to take fire from multiple enemy positions. Rodriguez's team had begun their counter-assault, moving aggressively against insurgent positions that had been focused on Sarah's advance. The lieutenant colonel led from the front as always, using his tactical expertise to coordinate his soldiers' movements while engaging targets with his own weapon. His team's assault provided crucial pressure that prevented the insurgents from concentrating all their fire on Sarah. The battle had now evolved into a chaotic three-dimensional engagement with multiple groups of fighters maneuvering across difficult terrain. The original ambush had been broken, but the situation remained extremely dangerous for all involved. Success would depend on which side could best adapt to the rapidly changing tactical situation. Air support was finally overhead, with helicopter gunships beginning to assess the situation and identify appropriate targets. However, the close proximity of friendly and enemy forces made immediate engagement problematic. The pilots needed time to sort out the tactical picture before they could safely employ their weapon systems. Sarah reached a position within grenade range of the insurgent command post, just as enemy fighters began converging on her location from multiple directions. She could see at least 6 insurgents moving to surround her position, understanding that eliminating her would restore their tactical advantage and allow them to resume their assault on Rodriguez's team. The command position itself was protected by a heavy machine gun that was now turning in her direction. The weapons crew had recognized the threat she represented and was preparing to engage her with direct fire. Sarah had perhaps seconds before the machine gun would be in position to deliver devastating fire against her exposed location, with insurgent fighters closing from multiple directions and the machine gun traversing toward her position. Sarah made her final approach to the grenade-throwing position. The movement required her to expose herself completely to enemy fire, but it was the only way to ensure accurate placement of her last explosive device. The insurgent commander had spotted her approach and was directing his fighters with urgent gestures and shouted commands. Sarah could see the fear in his eyes as he realized that his carefully planned ambush was falling apart. However, he continued to direct his men with the kind of professional competence that marked an experienced battlefield leader. Sarah's throw had to be perfect, as she would not get a second chance. The grenade needed to land precisely within the command position to be effective, while the timing had to account for the weapon's delay mechanism. Too short and the explosion would be ineffective. too long and the insurgents would have time to take cover or even throw the grenade back. As she prepared to throw the grenade, Sarah could hear Rodriguez's voice through her earpiece, reporting that his team was making progress against several enemy positions. Thompson continued to provide sniper support, his accurate fire forcing insurgents to keep their heads down during critical moments. The combined pressure from multiple directions was beginning to tell on the enemy force. The machine gun at the command position fired just as Sarah released her grenade, the heavy bullets passing so close to her body that she felt the heat of their passage. The weapons crew had waited a moment too long to engage, giving her the opportunity she needed to complete her attack. The grenade flew in a perfect arc toward its target. Sarah immediately dropped behind cover as the machine gun continued firing, its heavy bullets chipping away at the rocks protecting her position. She had done everything possible to disrupt the insurgent command structure, but the outcome was now beyond her control. The next few seconds would determine whether her bold gambit had succeeded, or whether she had simply ensured her own destruction. The explosion of her grenade within the command position created a momentary silence in the battle as both sides processed what had just occurred. Then Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with a tone of amazement and relief, reporting that the insurgent assault had suddenly lost coordination and that enemy fighters were beginning to withdraw from their positions. The aftermath of Sarah's grenade attack on the insurgent command position created a dramatic shift in the tactical situation. The explosion had not only eliminated the enemy leadership, but also destroyed their primary radio equipment, severing the communications that had allowed them to coordinate their complex ambush. Without central command and control, the insurgent fighters began operating as isolated groups rather than a cohesive force. Rodriguez seized this opportunity immediately, directing his team in a coordinated assault that exploited the enemy's confusion. His tactical expertise showed as he maneuvered his soldiers to engage the disorganized insurgent groups before they could re-establish command or coordinate a withdrawal. The lieutenant colonel's leadership turned what had been a desperate defensive situation into an aggressive pursuit of a defeated enemy. Sarah remained behind cover as automatic weapons fire continued to rake her position, but the volume and accuracy of enemy fire was noticeably decreasing. Through her scope, she could see insurgent fighters abandoning their prepared positions and attempting to withdraw up the valley walls. The disciplined defensive network that had nearly destroyed Rodriguez's team was dissolving into individual survival efforts. Thompson's voice came through the radio with reports of enemy movement as his elevated position allowed him to track insurgent withdrawal routes. His sniper rifle continued to speak at regular intervals, engaging fleeing fighters and preventing them from establishing new defensive positions. The precision of his shots was forcing the insurgents to abandon equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape. Lycia helicopter gunships overhead had finally sorted out the tactical situation and began engaging insurgent groups that were attempting to withdraw across open ground. The distinctive sound of rotary cannons and rocket explosions echoed through the valley as air support provided the decisive firepower needed to complete the destruction of the enemy force. Martinez worked frantically with her radio equipment to coordinate the various friendly forces and ensure that air support was engaging appropriate targets. Her communications expertise was crucial in preventing friendly fire incidents as multiple units maneuvered across the same terrain. The complexity of coordinating ground and air assets in such close proximity required exceptional skill and attention to detail. Rodriguez's team had successfully broken out of their defensive positions and was now pursuing the retreating insurgents. The lieutenant colonel's tactical acumen was evident as he directed his soldiers in a textbook exploitation of enemy weakness, maintaining pressure while avoiding the kind of reckless pursuit that could lead to additional casualties. Sarah finally emerged from cover as the immediate threat to her position diminished. Her uniform was torn and dirty from her aggressive movement across the rocky terrain, and she could feel the sting of multiple cuts from rock fragments and debris. However, she was alive and largely uninjured, a testament to both her tactical skills and considerable luck. Kim immediately moved to check on Sarah's condition, his medical training making him acutely aware of the stress that prolonged combat placed on the human body. Despite her protests that she was fine, he insisted on a quick examination to ensure that she had not sustained injuries in the heat of battle that adrenaline might be masking. The battlefield was now littered with abandoned enemy equipment and supplies, evidence of how quickly the insurgent withdrawal had turned into a rout. Rodriguez's team was systematically clearing the enemy positions, ensuring that no threats remained while gathering intelligence materials that might provide information about future enemy operations. Thompson began the process of displacing from his overwatch position, carefully moving down the slope while maintaining awareness of potential threats. His contribution to the battle had been significant, with confirmed kills on multiple enemy fighters who had posed critical threats to both friendly teams. His precision shooting had been a decisive factor in the successful outcome. Morrison had performed exceptionally well for a soldier on his first deployment, following orders without hesitation and maintaining his composure under the most intense combat conditions. Sarah made a mental note to ensure that his performance was properly recognized in her after-action report, as he had proven himself to be a valuable addition to the team. The abandoned outpost that had been their original objective was now within easy reach, but the mission parameters had changed dramatically. Instead of a simple reconnaissance and security operation, they had stumbled into a major insurgent stronghold and had been forced to fight a significant engagement to survive. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with instructions for consolidating their forces and preparing for extraction. The tactical situation was now under control, but he wanted to minimize exposure time in an area where additional enemy forces might be operating. His caution was well-founded, as insurgent groups in the region were known to conduct follow-up attacks on coalition forces. Air support continued to patrol the surrounding area, providing overwatch as the ground forces completed their missions and prepared for withdrawal. The helicopter crews had proven their professionalism by effectively engaging enemy targets while avoiding friendly fire. Despite the complex and rapidly changing tactical situation, Sarah gathered her team for a quick equipment check and casualty assessment. Remarkably, none of her soldiers had sustained serious injuries during the intense firefight, though all showed signs of the physical and emotional stress that accompanied prolonged combat. Their gear had taken a beating, but everything essential remained functional. The intelligence value of the captured enemy positions was significant. Rodriguez's team had recovered documents, communications equipment, and weapons that would provide valuable information about insurgent operations in the region. The ambush site itself revealed a level of preparation and coordination that suggested this had been a major enemy operation. As they prepared to move toward the extraction point, Sarah reflected on the events of the past few hours. What had begun as a routine security mission had escalated into a major engagement that tested every aspect of their training and professional competence. The success of the operation was due to the collective efforts of exceptional soldiers working as a coordinated team. Rodriguez approached Sarah as they prepared to move out, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and professional respect. The lieutenant colonel was not given to unnecessary praise, but his expression conveyed recognition of the crucial role that Sarah's actions had played in the successful outcome of the engagement. The extraction went smoothly, with helicopter transport arriving on schedule to remove both teams from the operational area. As Sarah settled into the aircraft's canvas seating, she could see the valley floor receding below them, now peaceful again after the violence that had erupted there earlier in the day. The formal debriefing would come later, along with the paperwork and official recognition that followed significant combat actions. However, Sarah knew that the real measure of success was simpler. Rodriguez and his entire team were alive and returning safely to base. Her willingness to take extraordinary risks had prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. Word of Sarah's actions spread quickly through the military community, as stories of exceptional courage always do among soldiers. Her bold assault on the insurgent command position became the subject of analysis and discussion in military schools and training centers, studied as an example of tactical innovation under extreme pressure. The formal commendation process moved through military channels with unusual speed. Recognition that Sarah's actions had gone far beyond the normal expectations of duty and service. Her superiors understood that her quick thinking and aggressive action had prevented a significant military disaster and had demonstrated the kind of leadership that inspired others to exceptional performance. Sarah's story became part of military history, not just for the tactical success she had achieved, but for the way she had demonstrated that courage and innovation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Her willingness to risk everything for her fellow soldiers embodied the highest traditions of military service and left an indelible mark on all who served with her.